Okay, so it's 10:30, so let's just get started. Hello everyone and welcome to the September Team Studio TLCC webinar. Thanks for joining us today. We hope everyone had a great summer and we're happy to get back to these webinars with you. I'd like to welcome our speakers today, Brad Facets and Paul Delanebbia, who will be presenting just the Facets thing. My name is Helene Bedrikian and I'm joined today by Howard Greenberg of TLCC and Paul, who is also of TLCC and a presenter today, and of course Brad. On the agenda today, I'll be taking a few moments to tell you about Team Studio, who we are and what we do. I'll then be passing the controls on to Howard at TLCC so he can do the same, and then we'll get to Paul and Brad to dive right in. So before we get started, a few administrative things to go over. First, we have over 200 attendees today. To protect your privacy, the attendee list is not public, so your name is the only one that you'll see in the attendee list. You're all muted during the session, so participation will be through the chat window and the Q&A panel. You're free to ask questions whenever you like, but we'll be covering questions at the end of the session. This session is being recorded, and the link will be sent to you in a follow-up email later this week, also with a link to our slides. So if you do like what you hear during today's session, feel free to tweet us at TeamStudio at TLCCLCD and add Facets and use the hashtag XPages. So next, a little bit about Team Studio. We may have assisted you in the past with application development. We've been delivering innovative developer tools and productivity tools to the Notes and Domino community since 1996. We specialize in source code control, version management, and source code management. And in 2010, we moved into the mobile application arena with the launch of our Unplugged platform. Unplugged gives you the ability to extend your Notes applications out to mobile devices. And the unique thing about Unplugged is that it leverages the powerful technology of XPages and provides a native app experience for the user. These apps that are built on Unplugged have the capability to function when offline. We're very proud to have been the recipient of the IBM Collaboration Solution Award at Connect Conference in January of 2013. And this product is available on major mobile platforms, including BlackBerry, Android, or iOS. So in addition to Unplugged as a platform, which allows clients to create custom mobile applications that meet their own specs, we provide off-the-shelf apps like Team Studio Continuity. This app allows users to import their plans, crisis emergency plans, and call trees, among other things. They get imported directly into the mobile device, and the information is available for them even when connectivity becomes compromised. Team Studio Continuity also works on all the major platforms, so BlackBerry, Android, and iOS. So just an update on some of the upcoming activities for Team Studio. Our next webinar with TLCC will be on October 17th. This session is about optimizing XPages performance, and it'll be presented by Howard Greenberg of TLCC and Ulrich Krauss. The link to register is available on the Team Studio website homepage, so go there for more information and to register. Second, we'll be presenting with Whitetria on October 24th at a DC Lug event. If you're out in that area, feel free to come by and join in. More info is available on this event on the Team Studio homepage as well. And on October 29th, we'll be presenting at a VLUG event, all things mobile. You can also find out more information on the Team Studio homepage. And if you're out in that area on the 29th of October, feel free to come in and hear what we have to say. And also a couple of promotions that we're currently running. Through September 30th, when you buy Build Manager, you'll get Analyzer and Upgrade Filters for free. And through the end of October, if you'd like a chance to win a free iPad mini, contact us for a demo of our Continuity app. Both of these offers are actually banners on our homepage, and for more information on them, you can click on those banners or contact me directly either during the session or after the session at my email address or at my Twitter handle, which was on the first slide of this presentation. So with that, I'd like to pass the presentation on to Howard so he can talk a little bit about TLCC. Howard, just give me 1 second to pass on presenter rights, and then you can take over.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. So while we're switching slides, I think the title of today's webinar might be a little confusing to some people. Well, first of all, anyone outside the U.S. might be wondering who the heck this guy is. that we had on the image for the webinar. Hopefully my slide is showing now. A lot of people might be wondering, who the heck is this guy from the 50s, and what the heck is he saying, just the Facets man? That's actually from, for those of you outside the U.S., or those of you under the age of 50 or so, that's actually a show called Dragnet. And it was originally a radio series in the 50s and became a TV series in the 50s, and then was resurrected in the late 60s, which is a little more my time frame when I saw it. And it was a really good show. If you ever get a chance, catch it on YouTube. And the Jack Webb was the actor who played Sergeant Friday. And the famous line was, "All we want are the facts, ma'am." So we kind of borrowed that tagline to talk about facets. So that's the other confusing part of today's webinar, because a lot of people probably have no idea what facets are. But if you used a custom control, you've worked with a facet, and Paul and Brad are going to make you an expert on facets, which is actually a pretty important area to understand when you're working with XPages. So again, as we mentioned, I'm Howard Greenberg, and Paul has been promoted to be a presenter today. So I am the sole host. Okay, so as Colleen mentioned, we have the next webinar on October 17th on XPages performance. And I'm honored and a little intimidated to be presenting with George Kraus, who's from Frankfurt, Germany. And George has been a presenter at many WUGs and other events, and has been lately speaking about performance. And so I'm going to do part of that as well, along with Ulrich, and it's definitely a webinar I would suggest everyone attend. At that URL that's on the slide, which you'll get a copy of, we have all our previous webinars. This really is a treasure trove of resources to learn about various XPages topics. So if you get a chance, I urge you to check that out. A little bit about TLCC. We've been doing notes and domino training since 1987. We've been involved in XPages since the early beta days, before they were even released. We do self-paced distance learning courses for notes and domino, and we have courses, of course, on XPages, development, also administration, and we also have user courses. And all our courses are delivered via the Notes client and Domino Designer or Admin client, depending on what course you're taking. And we believe in lots of hands-on demonstrations and activities, that the best way to learn is by doing. So all our courses are loaded with lots of hands-on things that you'll both demonstrate and see how they work as well as do. And our courses also include instructor access via an integrated discussion database. We also do instructor-led online classes for those people who want to be taught on a certain schedule with a live instructor. And we have 2 courses coming up this fall, Beginner XPages on October 28th, and the Rapid XPages using GoGo and application layout controls on December 9th. And when you get the slides, that link on the slides will take you to the information about that. And we also do on-site private classes, and we combine our self-paced courses with the instructor-led courses to create a blended approach, which is actually what Paul's going to be doing next week. He's going to visit a customer where their personnel have already been learning some of the topics with the self-paced courses, but are going to then have Paul there for a week to review in person some of the topics. And we also do mentoring services as well. Just a quick list, I won't go through these, some new courses and new packages. We've been very busy rounding out our Notes and Domino 9 curriculum. Also want to point out that we have a pre-course Introduction to XPages Development that's in both an 8.5 and a 9.0 version. Again, that's totally free. Just go to our website, you'll see it in the top right corner. And we also have a great sale going on until October 11th. A lot of these courses on this page, as well as many others, are on sale. So check those out as well. So I wanted to spend a minute or two before we got started with Paul and Brad talking. I know that in talking to a lot of folks who attend our webinars, which typically have been on intermediate level to advanced level topics like today, that a lot of folks haven't, they're kind of just gathering information. They haven't really dived in and got started with XPages. So I want to talk a little bit about skills, because I think there are some opinions and misconceptions about what you need to know to get started with XPages. So I'm going to at least give my opinion of what I think folks need to get started with XPages. And the first thing I would say would be you need to know Notes and Domino. XPages are built on top of Notes and Domino. They leverage the benefits of Notes and Domino in terms of the way that the documents are stored, views, how to access those documents and views. All that kind of information is stuff that you need to know before you get into XPages. So we actually have seen folks dive right into XPages who had no idea what Notes and Domino even did. And that's definitely a recipe for disaster, because the whole idea of XPages is that while it is a development environment, it's a development environment that uses Notes and Domino for its core structure. So the first two boxes here, understanding your Notes and Domino application development skills, and also knowing how to access the Domino object model with LotusScript or Java, it doesn't matter which one, but knowing how to get to a Notes document via a view, searching views to get to documents, accessing information on a document, that's all important skills to know. The other thing that's good to know or important to know is JavaScript. So if you don't have any JavaScript language skills, we definitely suggest that be something you dive into before you get started with XPages. Then once you have those prerequisite skills, then you can get started with XPages. And these boxes do correspond into TLCC courses, but however you learn this is how you learn it. You learn the basics of XPages, and from there you can kind of branch out. There's areas to specialize, mobile XPages, using some of the controls in the extension library to build a nice user interface, which is our Rapid XPages development course. And then you can also start to integrate Java into your XPages. So a lot of people ask, do I need to know Java to learn XPages? And my view on that is that you don't need Java to learn XPages, but as you start working with XPages and start working a little bit with Java, it's a great skill to learn and to add and to start incorporating into your XPages. So again, we can help you if you're interested in help getting these skills. If you want to do it on your own, there's a lot of resources out on the web. But if you want us to help suggest something, just please give us a call. Okay, so about how we're going to do the webinar today. There's going to be Q&A at the end, but in the meantime, if questions come up in the WebEx interface, there is a Q&A pane. So please do not use the chat pane. You might see the chat pane. Use the Q&A pane, and we will come at the very end. We will go through your questions and verbally answer your questions by asking them to Brad and to Paul. Okay, so your presenters today, first up is going to be Paul, who's my partner here at TLCC. So I'll turn it over to you, Paul.
Good morning, everyone.
And wait a minute, I got to drag and not drop. Drag and drop. Here we go. Okay, Paul, that should be going over to you.
Okay. And am I sharing my screen, Howard?
Yes, we see a slide now.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to start out today's discussion on facets, and Brad will be joining me in a moment. These are the topics we're going to cover. I'll start out with kind of a definition of facets, keys, callbacks. Brad's going to continue with a discussion on editable areas and custom controls, talk about some of the framework controls and the facets involved in working with things like the form table, the data view, application layout, and we'll wrap up with dynamic content and facets. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And just to start out, if we can poll the audience, Talene, can you start our poll question on what facets are?
So you should see it at the bottom of your screen.
Okay, if you could take a moment to answer that question, what's a facet? And you've got 5 choices there. And about 30 seconds to respond.
So Paul, what's the prize if they get it right?
So Howard, what is the prize if they get it right?
I think they have a new iPad that pops out of their computer monitor.
Okay.
Legal disclaimer. Anything we say on this webinar cannot be held against us.
I believe Talene said there's over 200 people registered.
There are over 200. I'm not sure how many iPads you think are going to pop out of screens then.
So can you show us the results, Talene?
Sure. Courtney's going to. There's actually 4 more seconds until people can participate. So, okay, we'll share the results now. Do you see there, Paul?
Okay, so fairly good understanding of what facets are. The wrong answer, the one wrong answer is E. In fact, the most correct answer is D, all of the above. So if you chose any of those, then you're certainly on the right course. So you've got a pretty good understanding of many of you have a good understanding of what facets are, or it was an easy question, one or the other. Okay, Talene, if we could clear that poll. So are you still seeing my screen? No, I should be showing designer at this point.
We're seeing the poll still. There we go. It's
okay. So for those of you who are not completely familiar with facets, if you've worked with a view panel control, and that's what I have here in Designer on this XPage, you've actually been working with facets. And let me select my view panel control. And on the display tab in the properties, I can choose to show a pager in the header and the footer, and let me turn off the header pager, so I'm no longer seeing a pager in the header, and I can turn it on again. Well, in fact, what's happening is if I select that pager, the one in the header, and switch to the source, I can see that there is a This Facets tag. So for my view panel control, and this is the tag for my view panel control, it has this facets. It has 2 facets. It has a pager that's assigned this attribute, XP key equals footer pager. So this particular pager is in the footer pager facet. It has another pager control with an XP key header pager, and that one's in the header. That one's at the top of my view panel control. So a facet is a named editable area on a control. Brad's going to talk about how you can add them to your own custom controls. And they have an attribute, XP key, indicating which particular facet on a control or which area of that control it's added to. So one thing that I could do with this new understanding of facets is I could take this computed field control, and let me just preview this page to show you what that's showing us. This is a computed field control that's using the @now function to return now's date and time. What I want to do is I want to move that computed field control into my footer facet to replace this pager at the bottom. So to do that, what I can do is switch to my source, and I could, here's my footer pager in my facets. I can comment that out. Okay, so I'll comment that out, and I'm going to move my computed field control in between the this facets tags for this view panel control. Now, one more thing I need to do is I need to borrow this XP key from my commented out control. XP key footer pager, and I'm going to add that to my start tag for my computed field control. So I've moved my computed field control in between the facets tags, and I've given it the XP key footer pager, indicating I want that in the footer pager facet. And now when I preview this, that's what I'm getting. I'm getting my computed field control in my footer facet. Okay, let me switch to another XPage design. Now, in this XPage, I'm using a form table control, and it's one of the extension library controls. So if you're running 853, this is available through Upgrade Pack 1. Or the extension library from OpenNTF, and if you're running Release 9, this is native in Release 9. So this is a form table control, and it has, oh, I burned myself. Sorry about that. It has a header facet, and in your extension library controls, your facets are identified by this green drop area, indicating an area where you can drop in another custom control. So it has a header facet, it has a footer facet, and then there's another facet here, but it doesn't have a name. That's an unnamed facet, and that's what we're talking about now, the difference between named and unnamed facets. So if I wanted to drop in a control into my header facet, you know, I could just drop maybe a container control. In fact, for any named facet, they can only have one immediate child facet. So if you want multiple buttons, as I did in this footer facet, first what I needed to add was a panel facet, and then into that I added a couple of buttons. And if I take a look at the source for that panel facet, I can see that it's between the this facets tags, and it has an XP key attribute equal to footer. Okay, so if I wanted to move that up into the header facet instead, I could just change that XP key value, save that, and now my panel with my two buttons are in the header facet. And I can see now there's nothing in my footer facet. Again, I have my green dot indicating I can drag and drop one child facet, typically a containing facet like a panel facet. In this unnamed facet, you can add into an unnamed facet, you can add multiple controls. You don't need a containing panel control immediately. So I can add in, I already have 4 form layout rows. I can add another form layout row into this unnamed facet. It's a little tricky, but I think I got it. And this form layout control has 3 facets available. An unnamed facet for adding your input control, like an edit box control to display a domino document field information or to save domino document field data. And there's also a label facet to add a label for that particular form layout row, and a help facet as well. Now, if I look at the source, one more point, and that is your named facets, like your header and footer facets, appear between the this facets tag, whereas all of those form layout rows that were added to that unnamed facet are simply added in between the controls tags, in this case a form table tag, and we can see underneath it 4 form rows that were added in, including the last one that I just dragged in. So that's our definition of facets. And at this point, Brad is going to continue with the discussion on editable areas and custom control. So can you join us, Brad?
I am here.
Okay, and I'm going to drag over presentation capability to you. And you should have it now.
I do. The screen should be popping up in a moment.
And we're seeing your screen.
Okay. Thank you very much. So now that we have a better understanding of what facets are and keys and callbacks and how you're already using them in your applications, we're going to take a look at how you can add your own facets to your own custom controls to kind of use them from scratch. So the first thing to notice is that in the core controls palette of your controls, there's a control called editable area. And you can just take that, drag it onto a page, and you see this gray box here, and it says facet_1, which is the default facet name. So you can see in the property here, it gave it that facet name, facet_1. And in the source here, what it generated was a tag that's called XP callback. And the key here is it gives it this facet name attribute of facet_1. And that's what's going to have to match up to that XP key attribute that Paul was talking about a moment ago. So once we've put a facet on a custom control, if we then take that custom control, drag it onto an XPage, this is what we see here. As Paul had mentioned, when you've got a facet that's ready to add content, you see this green circle and this dotted outline around it. And that's your indication that you can drag and drop some other control inside of it. Now again, by default, this is a named facet, so it can have one element directly inside of it. Now if I take an XP panel and drop it inside the facet, it changes to look like this in the design pane. So we see a representation of the panel, we see it next to the facet, but the green circle goes away because now there's some content inside of there. And if I take a look at this in the source of the XPage, what we see here is the tag that defines the custom control, and we see the custom control now has its own this.facet tag. And for that panel that I put inside of it, the panel is inside this.facets, and you can see the panel gets an XP key of facet_1, which was the name of the facet that we added to the custom control. Now this is an important thing to understand. Paul was showing you how you can move content around if you move it within the facets tag and you assign the key to it. But the first step for this, you can just drag and drop content directly onto that green circle, and it will set up that relationship for you automatically. So you don't have to necessarily know the facet name or worry about it if you're just dragging and dropping something right onto one of those green circles. Now, we can take this concept, and one good use case for creating your own facets would be to set up your own layout structure, your own custom control that you could use to define the layout of your entire application. Now, if you've used the One UI application layout control, then you already understand the concept of how this works. But if you haven't used that control, or even if you are familiar with it, but you'd like to set up your own layout, say you want to use Twitter Bootstrap, or say you feel you're a better designer than all of those, and you can create your own layout, something you want to totally customize for your application, you can make use of facets, and you can set up a layout control that will allow you to enforce a consistent structure in your application. So that essentially what you do is you create a custom control for your layout, you add facets to it wherever the content will change from page to page, and then on every X page you have, you'll first add your layout control, and then you add your other content within the bounds of that layout. And the advantage to this is that if your layout has to change in your application, you've only got one place to touch. So you don't want to embed your entire layout on every page in your application because that's a lot more difficult to maintain. So we're going to start with a simple example here of how you could use these concepts to form the building blocks for your own layout control. In this example here, I've just set up a table and I've put 5 facets in it. And I renamed the facet names so that they're a little more logical. It makes more sense what we're looking at. Now, if we can see down here, I've got the source of this entire structure. It's just a simple table tag, and there is an XP callback tag for a facet within each section. So we've got a layout top, left, center, right, and the layout bottom. Okay, now this is a custom control that I can reuse throughout an application to set up a consistent structure. Now, if I take this custom control and I drop it onto an XPage, this is what I see. Because I've got these editable areas, these facets where I can drop in content, I see 5 green circles because they're all places I can add content, within the structure of my layout control. So in this example, I've just dropped a label into each section, and this is what it looks like in Designer here, where you just see a label sitting next to each facet, and the green circle goes away because I've put content inside of each one. And then down at the bottom here, we see what it looks like if I preview that in the browser. So essentially, we've just set up that structure, we put the facets in there and dropped content into each one, and then when the browser renders the page, the server knew where to stick that content because of the location of the facets and that relationship of the content into the facet. So you can use that concept again if you need to set up a consistent structure for your application. You may say that you don't have a banner or a footer that's going to change. Well, that would be fine. In your layout control, you don't need to make that a facet. Essentially, you would just set up a facet for anything that's going to change from page to page. Okay, so moving from there, we're going to take a look at the form table design framework, which is a set of controls that Paul was already alluding to that's available, again, with Notes 9 or with the Upgrade Pack 1 to 853 or in the extension library. And essentially, these controls are there to help you build nice-looking forms very easily that are designed to work with the One UI framework. So here's a simple example of what a form looks like with these controls. You see we've got a form title, and then it calls a description. We've got 2 columns with 3 fields each. And at the bottom here we have this, this button bar that gives it a little nice visual separation and a place to kind of put your actions for the form. So as Paul had already showed these, if you drag and drop a form table onto a page, this is what you see. It's got the named header and footer facets, and as he had mentioned, the unnamed content facets, so you can drag and drop as much content directly into that as you'd like. And then down here we have the form layout row, what it looks like when you drag it onto a page. And primarily you'll focus on the label facet, and then this unnamed facet here, where you can use to build the content for your row. Now, as a quick overview of how you can set up a form using these controls, what you see here in step 1 is there's a form table has already been dropped onto this page, and you can see, its header, its content, and footer facets. And this form layout row control will drag and drop multiple rows into the content of the form table. Now down here in step 2, we're starting to take edit boxes or other input controls and drop them into the content facet of each row. And then over here in step 3, if we click on this row to select it, there's a property down here where you can just type in a label for that row. So there is a label facet. You can make use of that if you'd like to. But if you're just typing in a fixed value, you can also just click on it and type that in directly. Now here's a great tip to kind of speed up setting up your forms with these form controls. You may be aware that if you set up a document data source on your page, you can select a bunch of fields and just drag them onto the page. And what it'll do is set up a table for you, where the first column is going to have a label control, the second column is going to have an edit box control, but the label is already connected to the edit box is already bound to a back-end field on the document. So if you just take this whole set of fields, drag them onto the page, now you can make use of the label facet as well as the content facet of each row. So once you set up several table rows within your form, you can just start to drag these labels and drop them into the label facets. So, and then you can drag the edit boxes and drop them into the content facets. So this kind of saves you a few steps because now you don't have to type in label names, although you may have to change them based on what your underlying field names were. You don't have to type them in. You don't have to create all those edit boxes, and you don't have to set up all the field bindings to the back-end data source because it does that for you automatically. So it's a good way to save yourself a little time and less room for error as you're setting up your fields and bindings. Now there's a third control that comes into play when you're using these form table controls, and that's the form layout column. So as you can see up here in this example that we started with, this form has not only 3 rows, but 2 columns worth of fields as well. So there's a form layout column control here that's right next to the, next to the layout row and table. And essentially what you'll do here is you'll start with your form table control, and then you'll add column controls, and then you put the rows inside of the columns. So this kind of gives you the structure to set up however many columns you need on your form, and it handles the spacing in the layout for you. So it's a quick way to get a form set up, with multiple columns without having to worry about setting up your own tables and managing the spacing. Now, just to kind of round out this discussion of using the form controls, we're going to touch on adding your buttons for your actions and simple navigation. As Paula mentioned earlier, generally you have this footer facet here that's part of the form table, and since it's a named facet, it can only have one direct child element. So what we start with is dropping a panel inside of the footer, and then we can add as many buttons as we need to that panel. And the nice thing that does for you is it also gives you that nicer look and feel, that visual separation with that button bar at the bottom of the form. So if you set this up and say create a submit button, any other buttons that you need for your workflow, you can then down at the XPage level set up a simple navigation rule to say that if this form is submitted successfully, or if the user clicks a cancel button, let's name me a view page to go back to after the user is leaving this page. And then you can also say that we're going to stay on the same page if there's some kind of a validation error. So again, you can use these properties to set up your actions and then just a simple flow. So very quickly using these controls, you can get forms up and running with a basic flow between a form and a view. So that was an overview of how you can set up your forms with these controls, again, that are essentially designed primarily to use with One UI. So I also want to spend some time talking about the view framework that's also built to work well with One UI and also has a lot of facets that you can use to highly customize, and that's the data view. So in this screenshot here, in the upper left-hand corner, what we have is a standard view panel. This is what will happen if you just drag and drop a view panel onto a page. You set it up, by default, it gets the first column of the link, a few more columns, very tabular. This is your standard structure. Now, over here on the right, what we have is a screenshot from a pretty simple data view. Now, there's a few things that stand out right away. One is that this first column here, it's much more prominent, and that's just by design. The data view calls this the summary column. Essentially, that summary is that one piece of information that uniquely identifies your data, and the whole design of the data view is built around it. So that purposely is much more prominent. Now, what you have off to the right here, and these are purposely much less prominent, the data view calls these extra columns. So you can add more columns, kind of like a standard view, but I will say the data view is not designed to be used with a lot of these extra columns because they will start to fill up the screen and you lose real estate, for other things that you can customize with data view. But it is important to be aware, you do have these columns available to you. Another thing that stands out about the data view, and this is, in my opinion, the most important feature of it, is that you can see some of these rows here have some extra text below them. And there's this set of arrow icons off to the right here that allow you to expand and collapse content underneath the summary. And the data view calls that the detail section. And fortunately, this uses a facet, so you can customize it. There's a lot of flexibility that you can do with it. And the great thing about this feature is that you can build a lot more content and a lot more functionality into your data view, but you don't have to fill the screen up with it until the user wants to see it. So that's the collapsible detail section that I think really helps to set this control apart. Now, as we talk about the data view, it uses properties, complex properties, and facets. Properties, you're certainly familiar with. Every control uses them. It's basically a single attribute that has a single value. Facets, we've already been talking about, so if you weren't before, you're getting familiar. And complex properties, just to mention, essentially, they're just properties that have their own set of properties. And you can see them in the outline over here. As an example of complex properties, the summary column and the extra columns are some examples of that, because if you add a summary, it's got its own set of properties. If you add extra columns, they have their own set of properties as well. So we'll see a little bit more about that in a moment, but that's what differentiates a standard property from a complex property. Okay, the procedure here to add a data view to a page, again, we're in the extension library section of the controls palette. You can just take a data view, drag and drop it onto the page, and look at the dialog box that pops up. This should look familiar if you've used the view panel or other controls. You're basically just being prompted to choose a database and a view, and that sets up your data source. Now, once you've done that, and you see this is the design of the data view that you see on your page. It comes with 10 facets where you can use to customize content. 3 of those are in the pager, the top section for pagers, 3 at the bottom that are called pager left, bottom, and right. But as Paul had mentioned, you're not limited to only putting pagers in here. You can add other content in here if it fits your application. So the important thing is that there are facets and you can customize them however you need to. They're not just for pagers. So I do also want to point out here that there is a category row facet. And this is a great feature of the data view. Most other controls can't do this, but the data view can handle categorization for you. It can also handle response hierarchies. And if you want to customize how it uses them, you can make use of that facet. Now there's also an icon facet here, and essentially this does not pass through an icon column from an underlying client view. What this does is it kind of gives you a placeholder for some kind of image, and you would just define to say if some column has this value, then show image X. If it's a different value, show image Y. So this icon property gives you the ability to kind of set your own rules up for displaying images next to the data view. So that's a nice feature. But really what we're going to focus on here are the summary and the details, because this is the primary content of the data view. And as I had mentioned, you don't want to make use of a lot of extra columns, because as you can see here, the extra columns actually take space away from the summary and the details. So if you're customizing your detail section, or if you have a longer summary, the more extra columns you have, the less space you're leaving yourself to customize those other sections. Now, when you're adding a data view to a page, you want to be in the habit of setting this var property. So here we've selected the data view under all properties and then data, and then there's this property called var. Now essentially, if you've used a repeat control, you've certainly used the var property. If you've only used view panels, you may or may not have. Essentially, the var is necessary if you need to read any data off of the underlying view entry and compute something in your display. Okay, so it's not necessary for a data view, but if you're going to customize anything or compute anything, you need that var because that's your handle, to the underlying entry. So in this case, we've set our var and we've called it view entry, and we'll see that come into play momentarily. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there are summary columns and extra columns in the data view. Essentially, your data view needs 2 things in order to surface. It needs a data source, and that you can just select a view, and at minimum, it needs a summary column. So you're always going to have to start by setting a summary column, and the most important property is the column name. Now, unfortunately, there is no kind of drop-down or anything. You have to know the name and type it in. Now, it's important to understand if you're having a problem figuring out what that is, what you need to do is look at the design of the notes view that you've set as the data source and look at the programmatic name of the column that you're looking for here. All of these names will match the programmatic column name. So if your column in the notes view is showing a single field, the column name is most likely the same name as that field. But if your underlying column is computed, then your column name is likely to be $ and some number. So it's important to understand where that name comes from and what it has to match. So you need to know the programmatic name of the underlying view column. Now over here, we can see where you can go to add extra columns. If you were to click in this cell here to the right of where it says extra columns, you would see a little plus button, and you can click that to add as many extra columns as you need. And essentially the same thing. First, you need to define a column name. And that's all you need to surface it, but if you want a different title than the default, you can also override the column title. Now, column titles are optional in a data view, so it's up to you whether you display them. By default, if you display them, column titles will match the column name, but you've got this extra property to override if you'd like to. Now, a couple important properties of the data view itself. Just like in a view panel, there's a property here where you can say, if I click a link in the data view, here's the XPage that I want to open to display that document. Over here off to the right, under the display options, as I mentioned, we have the option here to show a column title, and we also have the option here to show the collapsible detail section. So the data view does not have to have details, but if you want that, you check this box, and you'll have the collapsible detail section, and it will display that icon off to the right to expand and collapse it for you. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can start to customize the details in the data view. As we can see in this example up here, we've put a panel inside the detail facet and dropped a computed field inside of it. And this will set up the example shown in that first screenshot, where when you expand a name, you see an address underneath it. If you can see down here, the value of this computed field, remember view entry was the name of our var. So that gives us a handle to the XSP view entry object that underlies each row in the data view. And as I mentioned, with that var, when you have that view entry, you can either read a column value from the column from the view, or you can go through that and get a handle to the backend document and read data from there. So this example here uses both. So we're starting with the view entry, we're getting the underlying notes document, and then we're reading the address value off of that. So to get the city, we're starting with the view entry, and we're using get column value to read a value directly off of a view column. And then to get the state, we're going back to the underlying document and reading a value off of it. So let's take a look at this. A live example here. So again, this is our data view. We've got our summary column here. Got a couple of extra columns off to the right. But I have these expand and collapse icons now, where I can use to expand or collapse each of these rows independently. And we can see here in this detail section, we've got that address that we just showed you how to look up using some properties from the underlying document and that column value from the underlying view. So that's how you can begin to set this up and start to use the details, and importantly, using that var property to compute them. So now I want to show you how you can take this to another level, really start to extend the functionality of the detail section. In this example, we're going to show how you can use a dialog box to actually allow a user to edit some content directly there from the data view. So this is a much more efficient experience for the user. If there's some data that gets updated frequently or needs to be updated quickly because somebody's taking a phone call, you can provide this kind of functionality, and then the user doesn't have to click a link, open a document, put it in edit mode, change a field, save it, go back to the view, and find where they were. This is a lot more efficient if we can just pop this dialog box up and let them make changes right there in line. So to do this, as you can see, we're still here in our data view. We're in the detail section, and certainly there's a panel here first, and we've got a field to show the address. We've got a link that that's set up to trigger the edit, and then we've also put a dialog box into here as well. Okay, now in the second step here, we can see this dialog box. We've set up a data source, and it's essentially, it's going to be the same document that you're already seeing in the data view, but we need to get that from the view entry. So again, we use our view entry object. That gives us the handle to our XSP view entry from the underlying row, and there's a property there, a method there called getNodeID. So I can use that to get the node ID of the document that I'm already looking at. So in the document ID here of our data source in the dialog box, we just compute it to this value here, and then when the dialog box pops up, it knows that it's linked to the document that we're already looking at in the data view. So now that that data source is set up, we add a few fields here. Contact, phone, and email are the ones that we want to make available to edit, and we're binding them to that document data source. And then finally, we add some buttons at the bottom here. And what the save button does is it triggers a save, and then it says, you know, get this component. Dialog1 is the name of the dialog box. It's going to hide the dialog. And the second parameter that you pass here, detail panel, that's saying trigger a partial refresh on the detail panel after hiding the dialog box. So this kind of lets it all work seamlessly for the user. So when they pop up the dialog, they make a change, they click the save button, it updates immediately in front of them. Let's take a look at how this works. Okay, so here I'm in a data view that's got detail sections that are expanded automatically. It's one of the options that you have. And we can see here we've got this edit contact link. And when I click on it, I get my dialog box that pops up. So I'm just going to go here to the phone number and add some X's to it. And I click save, and you see that was seamless. It updated that immediately right in line. And that was much more efficient than having to open the document, change it, come back, find my place in the view, and all of that. That's a much better user experience. And that's a great example of customizing the detail section in the data view. Now, just to give you a few more options here, if there's another variation on the screen, we can do the same thing with a tooltip dialog control. So instead of a standard dialog box, another option is a tooltip dialog. The difference with this is that, as you can see here, it doesn't darken the rest of the screen. The tooltip is not modal, so it doesn't require that you respond to it. You can just click anywhere off of it and it'll just go away. So if that's a better experience for the users, you don't want them to have to be forced to address the dialog box, then maybe the tooltip dialog is a good option. So the setup over here is essentially the same, except that we're using a tooltip dialog instead of a standard dialog box. And the difference here is our edit contact link. Instead of opening a dialog box, in this case it's using client-side JavaScript to say xsp.openTooltip dialog, and we're passing in here the generated client-side ID of that tooltip dialog, and the second parameter here is the name of the control that the tooltip should be bound to. So wherever on the page we want the tooltip to display, we just send it the name of that control, and in this case, computed field 2 is this line here, so the tooltip displays right below it. Take a look at this in practice. I refresh this page because we're using the same data, and we can see this was the document that I updated with the dialog box. So now let's edit it, and now we get the tooltip dialog, where again, if I just click somewhere away from it, it goes away. If I click it again, I'm just going to change these X's to Y's, save it. Same experience for the user. Happened seamlessly. It was a pop-up. It was very efficient. And the data was updated right in front of them without them having to leave the screen and go anywhere else. Now, we also want to show one more example of how you can do this without leaving the screen, and that would be using an in-place form control. So the setup, again, is very similar. Your data source is set up and bound the same way. Your fields are there the same way. The only difference being that your edit link now is going to display this in-place form, and your save button is just going to save the document and hide that form. So just a different way to handle or attack the same problem here. So in this case, when I click edit, the form just pops out right below. So I can use this, change this again, save it, and the form goes away, and the data is updated immediately. So just to show you, you have a lot of flexibility. There's a lot that you can do in this detail section and you have a lot of options to really improve the experience for the user. And I think all of this allows the data view to be a much more modern experience because it's so highly flexible, and it's not just, it doesn't just look like a view in the Notes client, like a straight list of columns. You have a lot that you can do to flexibly design it and add a lot of great functionality. So far we've been talking about customizing the details of the data view, but I also want to mention that the summary is a facet as well. If you recall, there is a summary facet in there. In the example early on, we showed how you would just set the summary up to a single column, and that's fine, but be aware that you can also customize the summary too, so you have all this flexibility there as well. The important thing to understand is, again, it's a named facet, so it can have one direct child element. So drop a panel or a div or some kind of container control into the summary facet, and then you can start adding other controls to customize it as well. The other thing to remember, if you do customize the summary, the data view will not automatically build you a link to open the document, so you need to create that link yourself. But if you set it up, that link, and you surround it with H4 tags, you'll get the same exact look and feel that you have with the default data view link. So just to show you a couple examples here, off to the left is a very simple example from an initial prototype I worked on just testing this concept, whereas this data view shows a 2-line summary for every entry. So instead of just that 1-line link, you see these 2 lines for every entry. And if you can see off to the right here, there is no expand and collapse. So there's no details even involved in this data view. This just has a 2-line summary for each one. So we can show a company name, but we can show a little bit more information in a second line. And what that does is, again, it gives us a little bit of a more modern look and feel other than just 1 line per entry. Now, off to the right here is a great example of a custom summary in data view. And this is from an IBM developer wiki, where you can see they've got a 3-line summary where they've got their title and link. The second line here has a name, a date, and tags, and these have active links that you can click to find related content. And then the third line is essentially a summary of the content. So this is a great example of a customized data view, and even has an icon spot on the left-hand side that they're making use of. But again, there's no details here. There's nothing to expand and collapse. These 3 lines are shown as the summary for every entry in this data view. And just one more concept down here, where here's a data view where we want to show a link on 1 line, but then have a second line that shows a lot more information, but we didn't want to clutter up the screen with all the labels for those fields, so we used icons instead. So there's some kind of a visual indicator of what that data is, but we didn't have to fill it up with a lot more text. And in this case, as users get used to it, you could hover over an icon and a title will pop up to explain what the label would be. But as you can see, it's just a much more compact display to get a lot of data in there without having to clutter it with more text than necessary. But you can see with this example here, there is an expand link. So in this example from an application that I worked on, there actually is a lot more content going on in the detail section. But we didn't have to show that until a user requested it. So again, this is a very highly flexible control that you can use for displaying your data. Now, one more example we want to take a look at, and one way that you can customize the summary and the details here, is more an example that might be more applicable to either a mobile application or maybe even just more of a read-only application, where we're going to customize here the summary link that instead of opening a document, what it does is just expand and collapse the detail section. Okay, and in this case, our detail section, we've got a view panel in here that looks up some related data. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so here again we have our list of customers, but again in this case, if I click a link, it's not trying to open a document, it's toggling whether the details are expanded or collapsed. Okay. Now it's important to understand that in 8.5.3, there was a method of the data view called toggle detail visible, and you could pass it a row number and it would expand or collapse based on the current state. Unfortunately, that method is broken in Notes 9, but there is code to work around that, and you can find that. I've written that up and pointed to that on a blog entry, and I'll show a link to that in a moment. But back to this example, we've got this data view that expands and collapses when we click the link. And if you look in here, we've got a view panel that's got these details that are a list of related sales orders. And this is a great example, kind of more of the flexibility of the data view, but also just the flexibility of XPages in general, because this data sits in a different application. So by having a data view here, by having this customizable detail section, and with that var property that we can look up information off of this parent document, we can now look out to another application, read data back, populate a view panel, and we've brought a lot more functionality to this application. So as I had mentioned, I have a blog series that I've written recently about using data views in XPages, and most of these topics that I've talked about here are covered in there in more detail. So if you're interested in digging even deeper into this, there's more information there as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul.
Thank you, Brad. Okay, my screen should be coming up.
I can see it.
Okay, so going to continue with a discussion of some framework controls that use facets. Going to focus on the application layout, design framework, and then wrap up with a discussion on dynamic content and facets. So One UI has been available to us in XPages development since version 1, and with 8.5.3 we had One UI version 2.1. With release 9 there's an addition of One UI version 3, I think that's 3.02. And One UI is a great concept. It's one user interface. There's some common things that the users become familiar with, like they log into these utility links, and they may see their name up here in the top right-hand corner in the banner bar. There are tabs to switch between applications. There are buttons on a place bar to invoke some sort of functionality related to what they're seeing. So One UI, been around for a while. Problem is, not easy to use out of the box. The documentation wasn't written for most people, and it's just not easy to use. But with the extension library available in 8.5.3 through the upgrade pack, or the OpenNTF extension library, and native in release 9, you can use an application layout control and simply switch to one of these One UI themes for your application to get that styling. So much easier to use when you use things like the application layout control. And where you set your various themes is in your XPage properties, and you can do it in the designer interface application theme. You can choose one of your themes, one of your One UI themes, the One UI version 2.1 pink theme, and the result is on the source for the same XPage properties, this property here, XSP theme equals whichever one you choose. Now you can create your own themes. So there is a theme design control. So in your themes folder, you can create a new theme. And the first thing you want to do when you create your own new theme, if you're going to use things like the application layout control, which must use one of the One UI version 2.1 themes, the first thing you want to do is you want to extend one of those themes. In this case, extends One UI version 2.1 pink. And then once you've created your own themes, and we can see quite a few new themes that have been created, you can simply select those in your XPage properties. So let's see a demonstration of that. And here in this application, we have quite a number of themes that were created. This green theme here extends One UI version 2.1 _green. And I'm going to just preview this XPage, which has a navigator on the right that allows me to switch different themes, and then it reloads the page. So the default One UI version 2.1 theme has this dark blue appearance. There's also a light blue theme. This Gen 1 theme introduces some green and light blue and some rounded corners. Gold theme, green theme, and so on. Now, if I were to switch to a non-One UI version 2.1 theme like Web Standard, that's what I get. Okay, so where you're going to use your application layout control, you must, for that application, specify one of the One UI themes. Okay. Now, also available in Release 9, there is a One UI version 3 theme. And this is for your Notes client, your iNotes client, and it almost works for the application layout control. So the application layout control is not enabled for this theme, but most of it works. This part doesn't seem to be working, but I certainly do like what's this rendering of these place bar buttons and the tab. They look pretty good as well. So I do like the look and feel of this, and I guess that's just the promise of where things like the application layout can go as new themes are introduced, like support for One UI version 3 theme, or you may be aware of the announcement of the Bootstrap for XPages themes and project at opentf.org. So this was announced by Philippe Briand and Nicholas Haidloff, and there's this great video where Nicholas introduced this project. And basically there's a lot of excitement around Bootstrap and its responsive design capabilities. The Bootstrap for XPages project is all about making those themes and styles and rendering the various components available to things like the application layout control. And if you watch that video there at OpenNTF, that's what you'll see. Nicholas shows you the extension library demo database with the Bootstrap for XPages theme, and there's a second theme, the Bootstrap for XPages responsive theme, which lends itself to tablet devices and mobile devices as well. So very exciting area and some very high ownership around this. Philippe has been successful before in getting different projects into the product, like the extension library. He was the original owner of the extension library project that was introduced at OpenNTF, and now is part of the Release 9 product. So some promise there, just watch this space. Okay, back to our discussion on facets and a couple of slides here. So the application layout control has 6 facet areas and 5 bar areas. So facet areas for defining content in your left column, typically some sort of navigation within the application. The main content area, that's a facet. The right column facet. There's also a header facet and a footer facet and a search bar facet as well. And then there are different bar areas for things like banners and application links, utility links for logging in, title bar, where you would have perhaps tabs to switch to different applications and so on. Now, this screen is showing you how to add an application layout control to the next page. And when you do add an application layout control to the next page, you're interrupted with this dialog, which says you're placing an application layout control on the next page. Really, it's best suited for custom controls, and you're not quite getting the concept. So the idea is you define your application layout control for one application or for several applications. You define that on a custom control, and then you're going to add that custom control to several XPages. So you get that common look and feel, across those several applications, which could be within the same application or again extended across several applications. This is showing, again, the wrong way to do it. On an X page, we have an application layout control, and we can see that some content was dragged into the 6 facet areas, like the mask header facet and the left column facet and the main facet and the right column facet and so on. For the other parts of the application layout control, like your banner links and your utility links and your title bar tabs, those are defined within properties. And we're just going to show in the next few screens the development of this application layout on a custom control for this application. Actually, this is application layout design that's used across 3 applications: the customer applications, the sales applications, and the parts applications. 3 different NSF applications within our application suite. So this is the right way to do it. An application layout control is being dragged onto a custom control, and you're interrupted with the correct dialog, where you can choose which bars you want to enable, but you can enable these later on in the properties. And you can define your bar content in the properties for your application layout. So you can define application links in the banner, utility links, things like a username and a user login. Title bar, where you can define your title bar tabs. And back to our discussion on facets. So your application layout control has 6 of these green dots, editable areas or facets where you can drag content. Now, if you want to use this application layout custom control across several applications, across several X pages, what you need to do is into each one of these editable areas, you need to drag and drop an editable area control. Okay, so that way, when you put this custom control onto an X page, in fact, that area, like the left column or the main content area or the right column, is in fact an editable area for that X page. And we use at TLCC just a naming convention. You know, whatever the name of the facet is, that's what we call the editable area callback control, its ID, and that's the facet name and the resulting XP key. So for the left column facet on your custom control, we drag an editable area with an ID of left column and a facet name of left column. Just a convention that you may want to adopt. The resulting source is shown here, and when you develop your second application layout design, maybe for a different suite of applications, you can simply copy and paste, you know, anything between this facets to quickly support that convention within your next application layout design. So, going to see a demonstration where 6 X pages all use this demo 761 application layout control. And here is my demo 761 app layout custom control, and I can see into each of the facet areas. An editable area control has already been dragged in and given the name and facet of the actual facet name that was already part of the application layout control, same name. And then if I take a look at the X pages that are using this custom control, there are these 6 X pages, and each one of them has, expand that demo 761 app layout control. And then the editable areas are now available to me to drag in content. If I'm not going to use the right column facet area, I don't drag any content there. So I've got a navigator in the left column, and in this case, a data view in the main content area. And when I preview this, Okay, that's the result. Okay. And that's the result on all 6 of my XPages across, in this case, 3 applications. Okay, so same look and feel. Okay, a little bit on dynamic content and facets. So the way that you're most familiar with dynamic content and switching content on the page is by using the rendered property, by coding the rendered property. And it's the place you go first because it's very much like the hide when that you're familiar with in form design. So what we have here is a simple application where the user selects either USA or Canada as a country, and based on their selection, they're either presented with a drop-down of US states or Canadian provinces. And for the panel that contains the US states, we have this rendered formula, view scope country equals USA, then render that. For the provinces, view scope country equals Canada. If that's the case, then true. Let's render the provinces panel instead. So that's what you're most familiar with. The problem with that is that the rendered property, and this is the JSF lifecycle, and this is a chart from Tony McGuckin's XPages Masterclass video series, and I highly recommend that you take the time to watch that series. Gives you a really good understanding of what's happening behind the scenes in every stage of this JSF lifecycle, and gives you many, many efficiency points and tips and tricks to consider and bring into your applications. But the problem with the rendered property is the rendered property is recalculated in all of these phases, these application phases that are indicated in red. And that's a recalculation. So if you have a very complex rendered formula, server-side JavaScript formula, it's going to be recalculated on each of those phases, so not too efficient. So another approach is to use the switchFacet control. So the switchFacet control allows you to define several facets and indicate one of those as the default facet or not, and then through a property choose to display only one of its child facets. So very effective. And for the same application, we can use the switchFacet control as opposed to multiple panels encoding multiple rendered formulas. And the approach to create one of these is first you drag and drop the switchFacet control onto your page. You drag in a panel. You give your panel an XP key name, like states or provinces for the various parts. And then what you do is you code the selected facet property of your switchFacet to switch to one of those child facets. Nice thing about the switchFacet is, it's not being recalculated in these application phases, but the problem with the switchFacet is every one of its child facets is added to the component tree that is maintained on the Domino server for every user for up to 4 of their most recently used XPages. So not very efficient in the component tree. However, the dynamic content control is very efficient in the component tree. I'm going to just wrap up with one demo showing us how that's used. So this XPage has a switchFacet control called switchFacet1 and a dynamic content control called dynamicContent1. Same thing. You choose USA or Canada, and it shows you the appropriate dropdown to select state or provinces. What we also have on this XPage is this custom control. Again, I got to thank Tony McGuckin for this. But this custom control basically shows a component tree dump, what's on the server in the component tree starting from switchFacet1, and in this case, starting from dynamicContent1. And when I preview this XPage, when none of the child components are being shown for my switch facet, I can see that every part or every component, every child facet is in fact in my component tree. I can see the states panel, I can see the provinces panel. When I compare that to my dynamic content control, all I see is the starting tag for the control itself. If I select USA to show my US drop-down combo box, no change here in the component tree for my switch facet. For my dynamic content control, now I'm seeing the states panel, but not the Canada panel. Okay? I only see that. I switch to Canada. So these dynamic content control, like your switch facet control, allows you to dynamically switch content, much more efficient than the rendered property, much more efficient than the switch facet in the component tree as well. So that's it for my presentation. So let's go on to questions and answers. Howard, can you join us in for the question and answer portion?
So yes, you can ask questions. We have a couple queued up already in the WebEx interface. You should have a Q&A pane. If you don't see that, it's at the top ribbon bar. Go to the top of your screen, it'll come down, and there should be a Q&A button. If you don't see it there, it might be hidden. You got to use the drop-down arrow on the right side and choose Q&A and ask your questions that way. Also wanted, we never properly introduced Brad, and I apologize, Brad, but Brad Facets has been working with Notes for quite a while, since 1996, and works at PSC and concentrates primarily on XPages. Brad has a great blog. He did mention it, that he has a data series on the data views. He also has a blog series, I should say. He also has a blog series on the data grid. And he's a pretty prolific blogger and writes some really great blog entries that have a fair amount of detail and graphics and does a great job at that. Okay, so for questions, the first question we have, I'll post to Brad. And Brad, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Howard, we can no longer hear you.
Well, maybe Paul, maybe you can handle this. You there?
Yes, I can hear Brad and I can hear you as well.
Paul.
I am here. Can you hear me, Howard? We can hear you.
Sure, what might be wrong with Howard, but I can hear both Paul and Brad and Howard up until very recently.
Oh,
so.
I'm back. Sorry about that. My finger slipped on the little volume thing. So I turned the volume all the way down. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, first question is from Dwayne, and this relates to the data view, so I'll point it towards Brad. When you specify content for the category row in the data view, does the back-end view column need to be categorized?
Yes, it does. All you have to do is specify the name of that column, and the data view will handle categorizing it for you. And so you're aware it can actually handle multiple levels of categorization as well, but the underlying columns do need to be categorized already.
All right, thanks, Brad. The next one I'll pass on to Paul, because I know he just experimented with this week. Paul, what has to be done differently for the summary columns column name property if using a JDBC query for your data source?
So that's the summary column in a data view. I couldn't get it to work with a summary with a summary property, so I had to use the summary facet in the data view, and that worked fine with the JDBC data source. So does not work with the summary property. In that case, use the summary facet.
So that you used a computed field in the facet?
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, and that was from
or you could put a link in the facet, you know, if your intention is to open something. But a computed field in the summary facet, some content in the summary facet to display, you know, whichever you want, whatever column of information you want.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Have another question from Dwayne. What are the options to use if you want to have categorization of flat data if the data view only uses category columns? So trying to
I'm confused on that one myself.
Yeah,
Dwayne wants to display flat data, but display it as categorized in a data view.
Yeah, and if that's the case, you already answered that question. It has to be, the back-end view has to be categorized. So Dwayne, maybe you can, if that's not your question, maybe you can post it again and give us a little more detail. Okay, here's a question from Terry, just in general on the compatibility of versions. She has Designer 8.52 for some group of clients, and I guess she's also supporting a 9.0 environment. If she works with the extension library in 8.52, will that work okay in 9.0? Anyone care to comment on that?
I have not worked with the 8.52 version of the extension library, but you know, it's going to be quite an old version of the extension library, so you're not going to get the richness that you can by upgrading your designer client to 8.53 and working with a current version of the extension library. I don't know, Howard, did you want to add a comment on compatibility?
Well, I know that, like, for example, there's some things that are bugs that don't work. Like Brad pointed out, the toggle details did not work in 9.0, but it should be fairly upward compatible. So I don't think you'd have, you know, see too many issues. I haven't seen too many either, but I know there are some minor issues out there, like Brad pointed out.
Oh, Terry's updated her question.
Right. Well, she said if I do go to 8.53, is that okay with 9.0? And the intent is that it is basically the same code, so it should all work. But again, should is you can't say it's all going to work, because as Brad pointed out, you know, there was an issue with the data view and toggle details.
I just one thing to point out with 8.53, you either need to have the extension library or install the upgrade pack 1 to get that set of controls from the extension library, you know, to make them available in Domino Designer or on the server. It's not
right.
base 8.53.
Correct. No, very good point. And also let me point out that for those who are not aware of it, that in 9.0, the extension library is built in. However, it is a subset of the extension library that's available in 8.53. Some things such as the relational controls or the social business controls are not in the core 9.0 product, and there is another extension library you can download for 9.0 that has those, what they call the experimental type controls that IBM has chosen not to put in the base product yet in the 9.x code stream. Maybe at some point in the future they will, but you know, not everything in the 8.53 extension library is in the 9.0 product as it ships from IBM. Okay, we have another question from Phil, and I'm assuming this is about the data view. I could be wrong. If not, Phil, let us know. How do you control the spacing between columns?
You would have to go to the style sheets for that. I mean, that's I haven't done that specifically, but if you can open it in something like Firefox and inspect the elements, you can start to see what class names it assigns to them, and then you could use style sheet properties to add some padding or margin between the cells as you need to.
Okay, thanks, Brad. And then we also have a question from Stephanie. If I guess she's going to use the application layout control and saying only one only one UI theme shows up when she has to use the application layout control. How does she see the other one UI themes? Paul, do you want to take that one?
You just type in the theme name. So you'll only see, in your application, you'll only see, I believe, One UI version 2.1, but if you know the theme names, which are One UI, V 2.1 underscore pink or blue, or purple, or silver. So you can go to your File Explorer, take a look at those file names, and you can switch those various themes, or right in the presentation I had a chart that showed the various names of themes. So just type in the name of the theme, and you can select it that way.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And just to clarify,
a few more things. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, Stephanie, if you're just seeing that One UI theme when you drag the application layout control, what Paul's talking about is in the XSP properties file where you set the theme. I know the application layout does let you switch themes when you drag that over, but that probably is more limited as opposed to what you could type in the XSP properties. Go ahead, Brad.
I believe I've also noticed that if you're talking about the application properties where you can choose a theme, I believe in 853 and earlier, that list is not pre-populated. It's just whatever you've already used plus any theme documents that you have in the application. But I'm pretty sure I've noticed with R9 that it does give you that full list to select from automatically. So that seems to be just a little improvement that they've made all those available to you to select from the list. But as Paul had mentioned, otherwise you can type it in as long as you type them in directly. And there is one quirk that I've noticed with that if you type it in with some kind of mixing capital and lowercase letters as you write One UI, it seems to kind of pick up the styles, but not fully. So I've definitely seen some issues with that. So I would make sure it's all lowercase when typing in that theme name.
Okay, thanks, Brad. We'll have two more questions. This one's from Richard. Is it possible to specify a data source other than a view for the data view control, like a collection of objects from the SQL database?
Absolutely. Just like anything else, you can do it. I have examples where I basically would just use server-side JavaScript and go read categories of elements out of a view, and then you just pass in an array. Same thing as like a repeat control. So the data sources are pretty much the same. You could pass just an array in, you could look up information and build, you can build an object that's got properties and it'll iterate through them kind of like a repeat control. But it definitely has more flexibility than only being a view data source.
Okay, thanks, Brad. And our last question is from Joel, and he wants to know if there's a video that goes into more detail on setting up details in the data view. So I guess I'll point him to, I think we did a webinar on this quite a while ago in our list of previous webinars, but also Brad, again, has an excellent series on the data view. Brad, how many different blog entries are in that series?
I believe there's 11. So that's written out in a lot of detail with code and with pictures. I also did 2 videos on Notes in 9 about the data view. One is kind of getting it set up and configuring it, but part 2 of that goes deeper into customizing the detail section in a data view.
All right, great. So there's a lot of information out there on that. Okay, well, I'd like to thank Brad and Paul for being the presenters for this great topic today. And hopefully everyone now knows exactly what a facet is. And you also know what the key phrase is from Dragnet and what Dragnet is. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending. If for some reason you know someone else who would benefit from this content, we're going to do this again tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. That's mostly for the benefit of folks in the Asia Pacific area. But anyone else who is awake at that time or ready to get some more, they are welcome to attend. So, let your coworkers or other XPagers know about that second session. It's going to cover exactly what we covered this morning, just in a repeat session. Colleen, anything to add?
We'll catch up with everyone at our next webinar, October 17th. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Talene.
Okay, have a good day.